Welcome to the System Simplified podcast, where we feature top leaders who share stories on how to successfully systemize a business. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hello, Adi Klevit here, the host of the System Simplified podcast, where I feature top founders, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders about systematizing a business. And today's episode is being brought to you by Business Success Consulting Group, where we create, document, optimize, and implement processes and procedures so businesses can grow and thrive. And today's guest is Zach Selch. Hi, Zach.
Hi, Adi. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. So, Marcus introduced us.
Yes, Marcus is a great guy. I'm guessing he was a guest too.
He was a guest as well, and
Yep.
I really appreciate the connection. So,
Yep.
Zach, you describe yourself as the Alfred from Batman, for those of our listeners that are familiar with Batman. So you are, in terms of sales, so if we can imagine the VP of sales as Batman, you are Alfred standing behind and making sure that Batman knows what to do.
Yeah, basically, yeah, that's the way I like to look at it. I think a few years ago, I saw this woman on LinkedIn and she said, I'm the Robin to the VP of sales Batman. And I thought, that's really interesting. I guess I'm the Alfred. And, when you take a look at Alfred's backstory, Alfred had a lot of interesting things going on, but he was very satisfied with his position in life supporting a superhero. And I've done everything. I did what I wanted to do. I've been a VP of sales. I've brought in a lot of business. I've done a lot of stuff. And what I find now is that I support really good VPs of sales and make them into superheroes, right? Take them that last little bit from being very good to being just world class. And I don't need the title, I don't need the recognition. I do like the paycheck, but I just am the guy who makes other people into superheroes in terms of that bit of global sales by, like you said in the beginning, bringing the methodology, the systems, the ideas that maybe they're not going to think up themselves.
Absolutely. So, I definitely interviewed sales coaches before, but this is unique because you're working with the VP of sales. You're coaching the VP of sales from the top. So first of all, tell us a little bit about you, because you grew up in a trailer. You led men into combat at the age of 19. And you're a certified barbecue pit master. Okay, so this is like all over your childhood, your definitely your courage and your ability to command and to be a leader and also have fun. So tell us your story.
Basically, yeah, I think the best way of looking at it is I grew up very, very poor. And I dreamed about sort of seeing the world when I was a kid. And when I was 11, I got a job at a flea market. And I was selling factory second cutting boards and welcome mats, So they had come out of a factory and they all had a little problem with them and they ended up in the flea market. And this is like, you picture 1976. I'm selling $1,000 a day worth of $15 cutting boards at age 11. And
that's like 10,000 today, probably.
Yeah, that's a lot of money. And most of the people, in the place, they were standing in the hallway going, three for a dollar, three for a dollar, three for a dollar, something like that. And I'm stopping people and saying, so how do you like Pennsylvania? Are you enjoying your trip? Would you like a souvenir? What's a great souvenir? And I realized somebody said to me, you really know how to sell. And I realized at 11, I'm like, if I can sell this, I could probably sell anything. And I just decided at 11, a lot of people you talk to, a lot of the people on LinkedIn who are sales gurus, they say, well, I was an athlete, or I did this, or I did that, and I never wanted to be in sales. And suddenly at age 30, I found myself in sales. And I was sort of like at 11, I was like, this is how I'm going to see the world. And I got into sales, and I sort of, worked my way up through different things, and I moved around from different positions. And I lived I lived in Africa, I lived in Asia, I lived in Europe, I lived in South America. And I got to be a VP of sales for a company, and I did really, really well, and I enjoyed it, and I built up a team. And one day I was like, okay, you know what? Now everything is repeating itself, and am I going to do this for another 25 years? And I decided to open up my own business. So that's basically my backstory. What I found, the other thing that's really important to mention is what I found was nobody was addressing what is a fundamental part of world trade and business, right? There are all these people working in SaaS and software as a service. There are all these people working in all sorts of sexy types of sales areas. So much of the world economy is selling a widget, like a machine that's manufactured in Ohio, and we're selling it to Germany or to, Bangladesh or to Nigeria. And nobody is talking to the people doing that work. And there were no books about it. There was nothing about it. So I just started to get really, really good at that. And I realized also that I would come into a company and increase sales by 1,000%. One time I increased sales by 4,000%. And it wasn't because I was doing something magic. It was just they had typically, a lot of these, mid-sized manufacturing companies did not have methodology to their international sales. They might have fantastic methodology for their domestic sales and organization, but they didn't for their international sales.
Let's talk about that, because we are all about systems and processes. Right. So what do you do when you go into a company and you're working with the VP of sales? So what do you actually do? What is your methodology? What is the system that you implement?
No, that's a great question, Adi. So, first of all, very often, people will be doing things very reactively, right? Somebody reaches out from Portugal, somebody reaches out from India, and now they have a distributor and they're selling. They don't know the size of the market. They don't know if that's the right market for them. So the first thing I do is really say, well, why do people buy this product? And you would think that is a fundamental question, but very often companies don't ask it. Why are they buying it? What's the compelling event that gets people to buy it? Who buys it, right? And then we figure out what the right markets are. And then we figure out what is the buyer's journey, right? How do people buy it? And then we figure out, well, what should the sales process look like? The sales process should be a mirror image of the buyer's journey, more or less, right? And then we figure out, well, who should be the partners, the channel partners who are selling it, right? If the government of Nigeria wants to buy something through a tendering process, well, who is the channel partner who knows how to work in that tendering process? And typically, this is new to most of the companies I work with, doing this in a methodical way. And then we put together a sales process, and we keep track of conversion rates. But by the year or 2 year point with my clients, they might know every salesperson working for every distributor in their organization, and they can keep track of the conversion rates from stage to stage through the sales process. Whereas very often when I come into a company, they have absolutely no visibility. They don't know who's selling or how they're selling. They don't know where they can make improvements, right? So that's what I do. And it really isn't rocket science. It's very often applying the type of thing that they might be doing in their US organization to their international organization.
Right. So now, what is the importance, in your opinion, what is the importance of follow-up in sales and part of the sales process?
Well, I said this to my mother 35 years ago. Nobody ever gives me a check the first time we talk, right? My mother used to say, "Well, did you sell anything today?" I said, "No, nobody ever gives me a check the first time we talk." You have to follow up. You talk to people and they'll say, "Well, great, let's talk in September." Or they'll say, "This isn't really the right time." Or maybe they'll say no. And if you don't follow up, nothing's ever going to happen. But it also builds credibility. Nobody wants to buy anything from anybody who isn't credible. The more, if you say you're going to do something, you have to follow up. You have to do it, right? And so there are a lot of things like that. There's a lot of discipline involved in doing business well in all aspects.
There really is, and I think it is a very good point, because sometimes there is the misconception of, I don't want to follow up because I don't want to bother somebody, but it also comes across as, I really don't care. They don't really, probably not a good client for me, so I'm not following up. I mean, it happened to me too, in terms of like, I spoke to that person. They said they're going to follow up sometime in September, and they haven't. So probably they don't want me as a client, or I'm not important. It depends on how you
That's
think about
exactly
it. I mean,
right.
depends on, because you're like, hey, I thought I will be a good client, but there was no follow-up. So I think that it communicates credibility, as you said, it communicates care, it communicates that, it also shows that if you're following up, that means that when they become clients, you're more inclined to follow up with them and be engaged. Do you have any good tactics for follow-up? I mean, what do you recommend?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I'm going to say a lot of people, everybody has their own weakness. And I'm going to say follow up is probably one of those things that I struggle with, right? Like a lot of people. So I use a lot of different systems for taking notes. I'll tell you where I am today, where I wasn't a few years ago, was I record just about every conversation I have. I run it through AI, and I have AI write me a task list, right? So I can then put it into my calendar when I have to follow up with people. And I can say, and a lot of what I do is seasonal. A lot of the people I talk to, they're saying, well, I'm working on a trade show now. Let's talk in September. So I might have 30 people say, let's talk in September, or people who say, hey, let's talk in the beginning of the new year, right? The calendar year.
Yeah,
So
I mean, that's for your own business, but when you coach also others,
right.
it's
Oh, and it's the same type of thing. So you basically look, to be really honest, when I coach others, I'm always pushing a CRM,
right.
because for a manufacturing company, for me, I use a CRM, but my scale isn't that big. For a manufacturing company, you really have to be using a CRM. And there are so many good ways of using integration today that you can tie up your notes and your conversations with your CRM, with your calendar, and you can know who's going to reach out to who and that kind of thing. I like to use what I call a sales process map, where I'm basically looking at all my leads and all my leads and all my prospects and where they are in the process and what the next stage is and who's responsible for the next stage and when we should be reaching out again. Um, and I'll throw something out there also, Eddie, in terms of like, people say, well, I don't want to bother them. Right, but you also have to figure out, you don't necessarily want to call and say, hey, Adi, I'm just checking in to see how you're doing. That really doesn't give a lot of value. But if you can basically come back and say, look, I know that in 60 days, I'm going to reach out and I'm going to send Adi this article that I think is important to her. And that'll give me a good opportunity to talk to her. Right. And that's type of thing I think has to be has to be part of your process. As you say, I have these 20 pieces of collateral. Each one of them is really good for restarting a conversation. And when the time comes, I'm going to reach out and touch a D, and I'll use this article to rekindle our conversation, right?
Absolutely. Yes.
I'll throw out something else, right? At the end of the year, I send out a calendar, and I put a lot of effort into the calendar. It's one of these things they call an advent calendar that's full of candy. And because I'm dealing with international sales, I fill it with 24 different types of global candy. And it's very, it's the most expensive thing I do all year, except for trade shows. It costs me a few $1,000s. You know, they each cost me about $40 to have made, but I'll get, 200K worth of business from those calendars because I send them out and people get them and they're like, oh yeah, I was thinking of doing business with Zach. This reminds me. And, and that's a really good tool, right?
Yeah, so definitely stay top of mind, follow up in creative ways. I like that. That's very good. Are there any traits that you see that are important for a VP of sales to have in order to be successful at doing that?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, you need some solid resilience, right? You need really, it is a hard job. And, if you don't have thick skin, you're not going to make it. Um, I mostly work with people who are global. So you have to have an understanding of you have to have cultural awareness. You have to be willing, you know, people very often they'll say, well, I spent most of my life in Argentina, so I'm very global. I understand, other cultures. Well, you understand two cultures. You understand America and Argentina. But really what's important is, if you're the global VP of sales of a nice sized American manufacturing company, you might be talking to a Japanese person in the morning and then a German person in the afternoon. And then the next day you might be talking to an Italian and then you might be talking to a Brazilian. And you have to be flexible with that. Those things are really important, I think. But I also think, and then, like you said at the beginning, being methodical and being willing to work in systems. I just don't think you can scale and grow if you can't be disciplined around a system.
I agree with that. Absolutely. Well, Zach, if our listeners want to reach out to you and learn more about what you do and get in touch with you about your services, how can they do that?
So it's really easy to find me on LinkedIn. I'm the only Zach Selch. So you can find me on LinkedIn. I also have a website, which is globalsalesmentor.com, and you can find me there. It's really not that difficult to find me. I'm on LinkedIn, a lot of the day. So
excellent. All right. Well, thank you so much for being a guest on this podcast. It's been a pleasure interviewing you.
Thank you for having me, Adi.
Thanks for listening to the System Simplified podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.